Welcome back, Wolfpack. Verlis here, and this is how to use Mandibuzz, those stats. This is the perfect picture of a tanky Pokemon, and I love the stat breakdown. This Pokemon is so clear with what it wants to do. So let's start off by looking at those glorious offenses. There are none. It's 65 on the attack and 50 on the special attack. There's no damage going on here with Mandibuzz. It's all going to be about that super duper tankiness. 110 on the hit points, 105, so we're over 100 on that defense, and then we're slightly under 100 on the special defense. So there's going to be one thing that's for sure about Mandibuzz. It's going to look like it's not taking damage at all, so it's a really bulky Pokemon. Just get up and go and out-tank like a boss, and 80 on the speed. 80 speed is really interesting because we're actually going to be able to anti-tank a lot of Pokemon. That there's like wall breaking in terms like that, but when it comes to Mandibuzz, it like tank breaks because it's just a faster tank that can really shut down a lot of setup and stuff by having that 80 speed when a lot of other tanks are below that 80. So really interesting stuff coming out of the Mandibuzz. Look at its typing, Dark Flying typing. 6th generation, kind of lame when it comes to like Mandibuzz fans because you just get a fairy weakness for nothing, and that's kind of sucky, but that's really it. The rest of it, you know, rock, electric, ice, so your standard flying weaknesses. Dark just kind of gets tacked on in there, but because we are flying, we're not going to be weak against bug or fighting, and then we get our resistances and 2 immunities. So Mandibuzz typing-wise, going to be alright. The stab from Dark and Flying is pretty good, but we don't have offenses. Overall, Mandibuzz breaks down really, really well as a tank. Hopping into Pokemon Showdown, we're going to see what this Pokemon is good for. Now, you might see an offensive move here. Mostly for utility, actually entirely for utility. Knockoff, you're just going to remove an item and make it to where your opponent has less things to do against you. If they have Life Orb, that's more damage. If they have a Choice Specs or Choice something that's doing damage, you know, it's going to be antagonizing you. So you just get rid of that item entirely and it means nothing. After that, we have Roost. So not only is this Pokemon ridiculously tanky, but it also just gets a free Roost. So now we can heal it up, and that's a pretty nice thing. And we also get access to Defog and Toxic. Now Mandibuzz runs pretty much the same idea, but a lot of different movesets and different things that can do all over the place. So with Roost and Knockoff, that's pretty much going to be your core. After that, you can choose to be like a Toxic Stall, you can choose to bring a little bit more utility. There's a lot of different things that Mandibuzz does, but this is going to be the most standard of sets when you break it down. So Defog, going to be really interesting. 4 6th generation battles where you can only use like Kalos Bread, Pentagon, Pokemon, whatever. Pokemon that are obtained in the 6th generation, Mandibuzz is one of the few defoggers. So the idea is you lead Knockoff, you get rid of their item, and then you throw out a Toxic, and then you're good to go. If Mandibuzz comes on the field, you want to use that like defog to remove any of the hazards on the field. Then Roost, because most likely you've taken like Stealth Rocks and then a little bit of damage. So then you Roost it back up, Knockoff, and then the Toxic, and then you just Hyper Toxic Stall. Like there's nothing your opponent can really do to you because you Roost up more damage than they're going to be doing. Very, very rarely, unless it's like overwhelming super effective hits, is Mandibuzz going to be a 2-hit KO. If it's 3-hit KO, that means you sneak a Roost in there and they're going to have a really hard time. Also Leftovers heal, something to factor into, just makes it a bit trickier to knock you out. Looking at the breakdown, I was thinking you can do whatever you want here. Do you want to throw on a Rocky Helmet and max out your defenses and become a pure physical tank? Do that. Do you want to become a pure special defense tank? Do that. Do whatever tank your team needs, but if you want to be balanced, this is going to be the best way of doing it. Maxing out the special defense and then going into a defensive nature and then maxing out the hit points. Look at these stats, over 400 on hit points, and then this is really nice right here. Now if you want to balance it out a bit more, we can drop down to 280, then bring it up to 281. So we're going to have a really good mix of stats right here, and we're going to be just ridiculously tanky. And now also we can look at Mandibuzz's abilities. Overcoat. Overcoat is pretty nice. Pokemon's immune to powder moves and damage from Sandstorm or Hail. So it's not going to have to worry about getting chipped out in Sandstorm or Hail compositions. So if your opponent is spamming Spore or even like Butterfree or Vivillon with the Sleep Powder, you just bring in Mandibuzz and haha, that doesn't work. So you're going to have a pretty good advantage right there. And speaking of the other Mandibuzz setups, it has Foul Play. So Mandibuzz doesn't do damage with its attack, but Foul Play does damage with your opponent's attack. So we can get by that, and it gets stabbed. Stab Foul Play is always going to be a very, very powerful thing to have because now it's like doing a Stab Earthquake almost. Slightly less damage, but a lot of damage overall, so you can hit really any physical Pokemon for tons of damage, and that's going to work out pretty well. Also get access to the Taunt. This is what I mean by it being an anti-tank. So if you're not really worried about the defog or whatever, that's where you'll carry Taunt on a set like this. And now if you see an opponent setting up and they're slower than you because they're a setup tank, you taunt them. Haha, now they can't do anything, so taunt into Toxic. Now they have to switch out, they just can't do anything. They bring in new Pokemon, that Pokemon gets knocked off. Now Mandibuzz is just being absolutely frustrating. And just think about the weaknesses. If you build a team around it, like, oh, I need to just build like a Volt Absorb Pokemon or some kind of electric resistance, same with Rock and Ice. If you can resist out those, you're going to be just fine, and Mandibuzz is going to be an absolute terror to deal with. Actually synergizes with Steel-type Pokemon pretty well when you start to break it down. Looking at other things that Mandibuzz gets, it gets Flatter. So Flatter is the opposite of Swagger, raises special attack by 1 and confuses it instead of raising attack and confusing it. So what you can do is you can do the ultimate troll Mandibuzz. Generally the main problem with Swagger is that, well, if you Swagger a physical Pokemon and it hits you, that's going to be absolutely terrible. But Mandibuzz, it gets both. So if you see a physical attacker, you use Flatter. If you see a special attacker, you use Swagger. So they're not gaining any damage on you. You're still going to be in like a 3-hit KO range against most Pokemon, and you can get the ultimate shutdown. Fortunately, Mandibuzz is female. Actually, it's only female, which means Attract is going to have a very high rate of working because a majority of the Pokemon in the game just have a higher rate of being a male. So that means you use Attract, they are going to not be able to move 50% of the time. They use Flatter or Swagger, and then they don't get to move another 50% on top of that. So you're going to get a lot of free turns. Now the main problem here is that there's no other moves. So mostly it's just going to be like the most filthy, long, drawn-out silliness of Stall. But do you care? Like, if you're running this Mandibuzz set, you don't care if you're going to be in a battle forever. You're just going to hope that your opponent eventually breaks through the Attract and then hits themselves or something like that. The Attract is more just like a troll thing to make sure your opponent never attacks, but if you don't want to do that, you know, they will have to hit themselves. You can also throw in the Foul Play. Foul Play can work out pretty well. They're a physical attacker, you're already going to be doing a lot of damage on that Foul Play. They're a special attacker while you're pumping them up with the Swagger and making it where Foul Play does a lot of damage. So you can transition into that. Other than that, I was thinking a little bit more defense investment on this set, mostly because there's just going to be more physical Pokemon in the game. So you can just set it up like that, you know. After that, pretty much what you want to do, take a hit, throw out the move, take another hit, roost, and just kind of wait it out. They hit themselves in confusion, and then you roost up back to full hit points. That's the turn we go for the free Foul Play, and you can just kind of dunk out your opponent pretty effectively with this. Now I think that an easy comparison with Mandibuzz is Skarmory in a way. Skarmory is like an ultimate tanky Pokemon, it has the roost, it does things like that. Skarmory is going to be more setup based, it has a little bit of damage options. Mandibuzz is pretty much like the less setup, more anti-tank frustration form that's actually tankier. So depending on how you're going to be running it, you know, Mandibuzz could be more effective for what you're doing than a Skarmory if you're not really worried about setup. And that's the thing, like, you run it as the anti-Skarmory in a way. If you're running Defog, what's the point of having any kind of setup on your team at all, because you're going to be getting rid of your own Stealth Rocks or Spikes like that. So Mandibuzz is just kind of like, you're playing for that consistency. Works really well with a Focus Sash Pokemon. Focus Sash setup like Dragon Dance or anything like that, Shell Smash Pokemon work out really well. But normally you will need to keep them safe with that Focus Sash. This is a good way of keeping Pokemon like that pretty safe. So if you have Sash Reliance, Mandibuzz works out pretty well. Other than that, Mandibuzz gets Tailwind, maybe be used in doubles. Like you can use Mandibuzz as like a Tailwind setup into knockoff and some nastiness. Also, you can go like Tailwind, Flatter, Swagger. Just make sure you don't hit the right Pokemon for the setup. So there might be some interesting plays to be made with Mandibuzz. Just a really tanky Pokemon that you can bring all sorts of really just big fun and utility into. Foul Play for the damage, gets Heat Wave, but again, not really a special attacker, so you can just kind of go through the moves here. Has Substitute, you can be a little annoying. Toxic, Whirlwind. Whirlwind's actually good for anti-tanking as well, and that's pretty much going to be the Mandibuzz. Actually, when you look at its design, that pretty much tells you a lot about what it's going to do. It's just a big, fluffy Pokemon that's going to stay in there and be an absolute tank while frustrating you. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. That's how you use Mandibuzz. I hope you all have a nice day. Thank you for watching.